I'll be honest with you, magazine work is hard. In travel photography, it's not like we just go out, take cool pictures, and then people magically buy them. There's a process. There's a lot of work that goes into selling your work to a magazine or newspaper for a story. And newsflash, very little of it is taking photos. We arrived in Taiwan a couple days ago, and I thought to myself, since I'm not vlogging daily anymore, it would be fun to try to work at the same pace I used to before I had the vlog, back when I was selling articles to magazines and newspapers and doing a lot of editorial work. And honestly, I forgot how much work it is. After just a couple days, I'm exhausted. And it kind of made me realize that it's probably a lot of good, valuable information. Not a whole lot of people have a lot of experience selling articles and photos to travel magazines or newspapers or things like that. So, on this episode, this is essentially a complete guide to how to sell a story or photos to a travel magazine or newspaper. Okay, let's get into it. If you want to put together a story for a magazine or newspaper, you need, well, a story, or at least some sort of an angle. It could be something like the food. Maybe that story is local festivals, or the nature or hiking opportunities. It could be about day trips to do outside that city, or culture and architecture. Having an angle might make selling this story easier, but if you're really clever, you'll actually photograph multiple things. You'll cover lots of different things, because then you can double dip on a trip and sell multiple stories. So what's the process of actually selling your photos to a magazine or newspaper or editorial? First, you have to decide if you're gonna pitch before or after you travel somewhere. And to be honest, pitching beforehand only really works if you have a working relationship already with the newspaper or magazine or the editor. For example, I used to do a lot of work for the Toronto Star, so before I would go somewhere, I would say these are some ideas for things I want to do and some articles I want to put together. And then they would come back and say, yes, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a good idea. And it works really well and is easy. But like I said, it really only works if you already have a working relationship with an editor. The other way is to pitch after you get back from a trip. So just for simplicity's sake, let's say that we're doing that for this video. The second thing you're going to need to do is think about some magazines or newspapers that you want to pitch. If you're really into food, maybe think about a food travel magazine or a magazine that focuses on food. Or even just think of a food and culinary magazine that might take a travel story. Third, you need to plan your shoot. You can't really waste time when you're a travel photographer because every day costs you money. It costs you money in your hotel, your food. You gotta make the most of it, so plan your time. Usually you do this before you go somewhere, but you can do it when you arrive like we are. Basically, I sit with my computer open and I try to plan out a day's schedule where I want to shoot sunrise, the markets I want to shoot, the museums I want to shoot, basically everything I want to cover, and then I try to figure out how I can do it in the most productive way possible. I don't want to waste my time, I need to be productive. And then fourth, and finally, we get out and shoot. We do the fun part. Here's the thing, if you want to get into magazines and newspapers these days, you need to write as well. Long gone are the days where you could drop a series of images, without words, to a magazine and they'd find a writer to attach to them. That's what stock agencies are for. But luckily, we live in an increasingly visual world and high quality imagery almost takes priority to good writing. So, don't be disheartened if you're not Ernest Hemingway. Get out and shoot. When I finally get out to explore the destination, I like to have a bit of a shot list to follow. It includes places like this. This is Liberty Square here in Taipei. It's absolutely beautiful, and unlike kind of what you've maybe seen in the vlogs and videos before, when I go to a place like this, when I'm shooting editorial, I'm not trying to just get one big epic hero image. I need a variety of shots. I really need 4 or 5 or 6, up to 10 images of every single location I shoot. I need that hero image, yes. But I also need shots of the details. I need shots of people interacting within the space. Shots of the space interacting within the city. And when they do things like the raising of the flags, I need photos of those moments as well. That way when the magazine or newspaper finally puts together the story, they have a bunch of images to choose through. I took a dozen or so photos of Liberty Square, and then Jody and I went off to explore the city. And Taipei is actually, well, kinda awesome. I honestly had no expectations for this city when I arrived, which actually makes it a little bit easier to be intrigued. And I'm intrigued. I'm drawn in by the massive temples and monuments. I love the subtle bits of history dotted around. I love the narrow alleys, the constant street food, and interesting characters. It kind of feels like a melting pot of all my favorite Asian cities wrapped into something that's distinctly Taiwanese. And yes, there are plenty of photo ops. Back in the early days when I was really searching to find editorial work, I was shooting everything. And all day I was literally taking pictures and running around 16 to 18 hours a day. And while things are definitely calmer these days, we're getting around here in Taipei as well. We're seeing as much as we can pack into these 3 days. And now we're actually heading just outside of Taipei to a place called Jiufeng, I think, which is an old village and it's supposed to be really cool. So let's head that way. We arrived in Jiufeng in a heavy cloud of fog and drizzling rain, and honestly, we were a little bit worried we wouldn't be able to photograph anything. But luckily, the town is so densely constructed that the rain can hardly squeeze down into its alleys. The chaotic nature of Jiufeng, I'm told, is a result of a gold rush in the late 1800s. At that time, town grew so quickly that there was no time for planning. A lot of the constructed inns, tea houses, and shops are still here to this day. Jody and I take in a traditional tea ceremony, wade through crowds of people, and try to capture the vibe on the streets. The other thing I should mention before we have to eventually leave Taiwan is that when you're shooting magazines or newspapers, editorial in general, you shoot a lot portrait orientation. I know things tend to look better landscape orientation, but magazines are shaped in portrait orientation. Newspapers are shaped in portrait orientation, and they tend to buy a lot more portrait than they do landscape. So landscape might look better, but portrait actually sells better. The other thing is, there's no harm in doing both. Shoot one portrait, then switch it up and do landscape. Don't delete one or the other because it looks better, because you'll be surprised how many times an editor comes and says, hey, I like this photo, but you haven't landscape or portrait orientation. So yeah, shoot both.
Do you ever call back? Do you ever pick up on that phone? Stop pretending I don't know you're home. I guess not. Do you ever respond?
Trying to make the most of one last morning here in Taipei, I've just slogged up Elephant Mountain to try to capture a sunrise, which was a bust. But it is our last day in Taiwan and I'm trying to make the most of it. But I'm also kind of exhausted after shooting for 3 straight days. I have no idea how I used to do this 6 days a week, every week. But still, I'm enjoying the work, the city, and the sights, regardless of how odd they become. Jody and I are eating at a toilet restaurant for lunch. Yes, you heard that right. Then, after losing our appetite, we jump in an Uber and head to Jiufeng, where I'm promised lanterns and waterfalls.
Tell me why we don't make sense. Do I ever let go of the days I wish we had? Stop crying over things I can't take back, not yet. Do I ever forget?
I think I actually shot as many photos as one possibly could in 3 days, so it's time to do the bulk of the work. We're flying home early in the morning back to Manila. I'll take you with me. The actual work is still to come. Over 3 days in Taiwan, I shot 9 locations. I took about 600 photos, and I'm leaving with about 100 keepers. I'm exhausted. Some might even say delirious. The world's smallest escalator. Enjoy your ride. Okay, I'm home in Manila and now the real work begins. As one of my travel writer friends always says, this is where the misery begins. In my opinion, this is where you decide if you like making photos or if you want to be a travel photographer. It's fun taking pictures in the field. We all love that part of it. But it's hard when you get home and you have to face the reality that it's a job, that you have to pitch, you have to find magazines, you need to work. And then on top of it, you need to face a lot of rejection. So I'm gonna try to very quickly, run through what now happens once you get home. First of all, you find magazines. Step one, find the magazines. The way I do it is I open an Excel spreadsheet and I kind of list them based on category. That way in the future, if I'm looking for magazines again, I don't need to research for everything. And where do you find the magazines? Well, I don't want to sound really sarcastically snarky, but you Google it. You Google things like travel magazines, or if you're doing a story on food, you Google something like food travel magazines or list of food travel magazines, something like that. And you'll find that there's a ton of magazines out there. So once you do find them, then chuck them into your spreadsheet. Step two is you submit your story. But of course, how do you do that? Well, the good news is that basically every single travel magazine and newspaper out there has a list of submission guidelines out on their website. So go to their website and find the submission guidelines. Or another trick is to go to google.com and enter the URL of the magazine with a colon after and then add submission guidelines to the end of it, and it should help you find that page that you need. It's also smart to add that link to the submission guidelines to your Excel spreadsheet. That way you don't need to search it in the future. Those submission guidelines will tell you exactly what you need to do to submit your story. Follow those things. Step three is to plan your submission. Now, even though you have submission guidelines that you need to follow, you really do have the opportunity to still pitch. And I'm gonna put a link to an old video up here about how to pitch. But basically, be brief, be quick, and try to somehow show your credibility as a travel photographer in like the initial email that you send them. Really be careful about things like spelling errors and grammar and not following the guidelines. As soon as you don't follow the guidelines, an editor's just gonna delete the email. A lot of times you'll need to do a quick blurb of your story, so like a 100-word blurb from your article needs to go into that email, so just be prepared for that. Number four, what about the photos? Again, follow the submission guidelines because they're going to tell you how to do it, but usually it's via Dropbox or OneDrive or something like that. Most of the times I send like 8 to 12 images. I don't send all like 100 that I took on that trip because I want the editor to be able to focus on the best images and images that are relevant to the story. I also never watermark the photos because I think it looks tacky. I send full-sized images because they're not gonna steal an image. Nobody's that stupid. And finally, I don't crop the images. I keep the images at normal size because if they wanna crop it down, they can later themselves. But they're gonna want the whole image to work with for their design. And in general, just don't send weird like Thomas Heaton configured crops to magazines. Just send them the whole size. Number five is to submit. So you hit send on that email and you sit and you wait. And you wait for number six, which is rejection. Rejection happens a lot. In fact, sometimes it's even worse because you don't even get the rejection. Editors just don't get back to people. You'll send a piece to 10, 20, 30 different publications and you'll never hear back from them. Maybe you'll hear one or two and there'll be rejections. Rejection is a part of this industry and you just need to take it in stride. You also can't take that rejection personally. If somebody says your writing needs improvement, improve your writing, work on it. If they say your photos aren't good enough, get better at being a photographer. Take the rejection, learn from it, and grow. And remember that if you get a lot of rejection, that's normal. Everybody has this happen to them. And also remember that even if you get 100 rejections, it only takes 1 or 2 positive emails for you to eventually build a relationship with an editor. And the more you do this, the more you pitch and the more relationships you build with editors, the easier the career becomes. So, what do you think about being a travel photographer now? Do you still want to be a travel photographer? It is a lot of work. It's a really hard work, but it is so rewarding. There's nothing cooler than opening a magazine and seeing your photo giant across 2 pages or on the cover of a magazine or something like that. It is so rewarding when you do make it happen. So if you want to make it happen, go out and make it happen. There's nothing holding you back. You don't have to go to Taipei to make a travel story. There's travel stories in and around your hometown, wherever you live in the world. I guarantee you that. So that's it for today's video. I'll see you guys on the next episode on Tuesday, where I'm going to talk about the Canon RP. Crazy little camera. We'll talk about that in a couple days. I'll see you there. Peace.